A dead heat, an upward track, poll out yesterday shows President Obama ahead by 5% in the state. Is that the upward track they're talking about? Yes. We all know Governor Romney narrowed the gap after the first presidential race and debate, but things have been flat for 2 weeks. More and more journalists are calling Romney's bluff. This so-called momentum. So don't believe the Romney hype. We're on to his strategy of fomentum. Joining me now, Steve Kornacki, co-host of The Cycle here on MSNBC, and Democratic strategist Margie Omero. Thank you both for coming on the show tonight.
You're welcome.
Good evening, Reverend.
Steve, does this seem to be the way campaigns act when they have real momentum? I mean, what's going on with the Romney campaign?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's obviously a recognition on their part that a couple things have happened since the first debate. As you showed, the polls have narrowed in Ohio and other battleground states, and they have actually moved into a very, very slight lead in most of the national polling averages, less than a point. But they've never been ahead in the national polling averages before the first debate. But when you're now down to the last 2 weeks and you start looking at the electoral vote situation, they're facing, 2 to 3, 4-point gaps in Wisconsin and Ohio, and there really is almost no way for Romney if he can't pick off one of those states. I just don't see the path beyond that. So I think they look at it and say, one of two things have to happen to get them over the hump there. One is they need some kind of extra spike in enthusiasm among Republican voters. It's hard to do because there's so much enthusiasm among Republican voters already, but maybe, the idea of momentum, the idea that he's on the verge of victory would help there. Or the other thing is create some kind of late movement among swing voters, voters who might be very soft Obama supporters right now. And, that the idea of momentum begets momentum. Maybe if they can put the idea out there that, hey, they are about to defeat Obama, it can take the most wobbly Obama supporters and move them over. I think there's just obviously a recognition on their part that they need something to move 2 to 3 points in the last 2 weeks in those key states. And 2 to 3 points is a lot in the last 2 weeks of a race.
Now, Margie, there are two brand new battleground polls out today. In Colorado, the president is tied with Romney. In Nevada, he's established a 3-point lead. So all of this Romney momentum doesn't really translate when you look at the polls. I don't know what he's looking at.
Well, I certainly don't begrudge him his strategy. I mean, that's a perfectly fine strategy. But ultimately, the states are the states, and the Electoral College is not going to change. That's the one thing we know for sure is not going to change between now and Election Day. And states like Ohio, Romney has to win. States like Nevada, a lot of handicappers are saying is, pretty much going to go Democrat. People have now put that in the blue column. And looking at polls, whether it's in Ohio or Wisconsin, or even some states that are swinging like Florida, that are in play, like Virginia, you see some stagnation. And the articles that you mentioned in the beginning, where you have Mark Blumenthal, who's my editor at Huffington Post, and Nate Silver at New York Times, and Chris Cillizza at Washington Post, those are probably the 3 best experts on this. And the consensus is the momentum, came really after the first debate and is pretty much stabilized. And that doesn't mean that Mitt Romney can't win. It doesn't mean that he can't move in the next 2 weeks. And certainly people should vote. If you're an early voting state, you should vote. No one should feel complacent, not on either side. But it does mean that the real moment where we had Mitt Romney really control the dialogue was after that first debate. There haven't been a whole lot of moments other than that moment where Mitt Romney has been controlling the message. And right now, when you have Colin Powell's endorsement, you have the Richard Murdoch comments, you have the Romney campaign on the back foot, and we'll see how that's going to extend now in the final stretch.
Well, and you also had a pretty bad debate by Romney in the last debate. But Steve, let me also say this: many of us feel that the ground game, what goes on the ground, the ability to pull out voters is going to be decisive. And when you look at that, Team Obama seems to have the advantage on at least the field offices, if that tells the story. In Ohio, President Obama has 131 field officers compared to Romney's 40. In Florida, President Obama has 106 compared to Governor Romney's 47. In Virginia, President Obama has more than double, 61 to 30. So if field officers are any indication of the thoroughness or the breadth of the field operation or the ground game, the president looks good in these swing states.
Yeah, well, I think you have a couple things going on there. One is there is an enthusiasm gap. If you look at the polling, there's an enthusiasm gap between the parties right now. So it will probably take less effort on Republicans' part to get their people to turn out on Election Day because they are so motivated to go out and vote Obama out. It's more of a labor, I think, on the Democratic side to try to achieve something approximating parity there. However, there's an obvious opportunity there when you look at the polls for Democrats because there is a disconnect between looking at the polling models that look at likely voters, that filter out, just all registered voters and look only at likely voters. Romney performs much better in those than he does when you have, all registered voters. So the bigger the pool of voters is, the more people who participate and the more people who the Obama campaign is able to bring out through its own mobilization efforts. That will obviously, I think, work toward Obama's advantage.
Well, we'll see. I'm seeing a lot of long lines in early voting, and all of the polls are saying they're going overwhelmingly so far for the president. But we'll see. Steve Kornacki and Margie Omero, thanks for your time tonight.
Sure.
Thank you.
And catch Steve on the